Tasha had dealt with her share of rude customers, but the man standing at table 7 pushed her patience further than anyone that week. Dressed in worn jeans, smelling faintly of engine oil, he kept asking gentle questions she didn't have time for during the busy lunch rush. When he reached for her wrist to apologize for being slow with his order, instinct and exhaustion took over. The sharp crack of her palm echoed across the restaurant. Gasps followed. Phones lifted, and the man she'd struck simply lowered his gaze, whispering that he understood. What Tasha didn't know, what no one knew, was that the poor man she slapped had arrived that day with a purpose, a hidden grief, and a secret capable of turning her world upside down. But how could a single mistake unravel everything she thought she knew about life? Tasha knew the day was already slipping away from her the moment she stepped off the bus. The cold morning air clung to her clothes, and for a second she just stood there outside the diner's back door, breathing hard, as if the world would stop rushing if she did. But it never did. Not for her. Not when rent was overdue. Not when her little sister texted asking if there'd be dinner tonight. Not when exhaustion pressed behind her eyes like a dull ache she could no longer hide. Inside, the diner pulsed with noise and fluorescent light. Plates clattered. Someone laughed too loudly. The smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee floated through the air. Tasha tied her apron with quick, practiced motions, whispering to herself, "Just get through today." She thought she said it quietly, but Carla heard her anyway. "You okay?" the manager asked, brows lifted in that way that said she wasn't really asking. "We had more complaints yesterday. People think you're tense." Tasha forced a smile, one she'd learned years ago. Bright enough to look polite, thin enough to mean nothing. "I'm fine, just tired." "Tired doesn't stop complaints." Carla leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Come on, Tasha. I need you steady today." Steady, as if she weren't already carrying her entire life in both hands, trying not to spill a drop. She nodded and stepped out into the main floor, where customers were already waving for her attention. She moved table to table, taking orders, refilling drinks, apologizing for delays that weren't her fault. Her smile felt stiff by the time she reached the counter to grab another tray, but she held it anyway. She always held it. Every now and then, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't check it. She already knew it was her sister, worried, asking things she couldn't answer yet. The weight of that responsibility sat on her chest like a hand she'd grown used to, heavy but familiar. By late morning, the lunch rush began to swell, and the door chimed again and again as customers streamed in. When the man at the table 7 walked in, Tasha barely noticed him at first. Just another quiet face in worn jeans, shoulders a little slumped, eyes soft in a way that didn't match the noise around them. He sat alone, studying the room like it meant something to him. Not in a judging way, but almost nostalgic. Still, Tasha didn't have time for mysteries. She grabbed a menu and approached his table with the tired efficiency of someone who'd done this too long. "Morning," she said. "Coffee?" The man hesitated, then offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Yes, please, thank you." Something about the way he said it, slow, careful, made her think he was stalling, or maybe unsure of what to order. She didn't have patience for that today. Her tables were filling. Carla kept glancing at her, and the pressure of everything she couldn't control kept tightening in her chest. When she brought his coffee, he looked up again, studying the wall behind her, then the counter, then the kitchen window. Tasha caught the glance and felt annoyance spike beneath her ribs. She'd seen that look before, the quiet assessment some customers wore like they were grading the place, judging the service, the effort, the people, judging her. "This place," he murmured softly, almost to himself, "hasn't changed much." She blinked. "Excuse me?" He shook his head quickly. "Nothing. Sorry. Do you have a recommendation? I'm not sure what to try." There it was, the hesitation she dreaded, indecision that would slow her down. She heard Carla calling orders behind her, plates clattering, someone complaining about their toast being cold. Everything inside her stretched thin. "The menu's right there," she said a bit sharper than she meant to. "You can pick anything." He paused, absorbing her tone rather than reacting to it. "Of course. I didn't mean to bother you." His gentleness only made her feel worse, though she didn't understand why. She turned away quickly, annoyed at herself for even caring. This was just another customer, another task, another moment she'd forget by the time she collapsed into bed tonight. But as the minutes passed, she noticed him watching the diner again. Not critically, but almost like someone revisiting an old neighborhood after years away. His eyes softened at a chipped corner of the counter, at the waitress struggling with the broken soda machine, even at Carla barking orders with her usual impatience. He looked at all of it like it mattered, like he recognized it. Tasha didn't know what to make of that, and she didn't have the energy to try. So when he gently asked, "Is the kitchen always this busy around noon?" she heard something different. She heard mockery, a jab at the chaos she spent every day trying to manage. She tightened her grip on the tray. "Sir, if you have a problem, you can tell me directly." His eyebrows lifted in confusion. "A problem? No, because I'm doing my best," she added, voice lower now, carrying the weight of everything unspoken. "And I don't have time for—" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Truly, I wasn't criticizing." But her heart was already pounding too loudly for his apology to reach her. The day had been long before it even began, and now every word felt sharper than it should. She stepped back, taking another table's order, trying to steady herself, but her breath came thin and tight. Behind her, the man lifted his coffee, warming his hands around the cup. If he noticed the tension radiating from her, he didn't show it. He just watched the diner again, quiet, thoughtful, carrying a sorrow she couldn't see, and a story she hadn't heard. And as the lunch rush grew louder and the pressure closed in around her, Tasha felt her patience stretching to a dangerous edge. One misunderstanding, just one, was all it would take to snap what little control she had left. She didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming. It was already on its way, walking slowly toward her like a shadow she hadn't turned around to face. The breaking point didn't arrive with a shout. It came quietly, slipping into the crowded diner like a draft of cold air. 1 second, the room was a blur of orders and clattering dishes. The next, everything Tasha had been holding together began to tilt, just slightly, just enough for her to feel the wobble under her feet. Daniel was still at table 7, still wearing that gentle, uncertain expression that made her nerves twitch. She'd tried to shake off the earlier tension, but her hands trembled as she refilled water glasses. Her manager's warnings echoed in her mind. Her sister's texts buzzed in her pocket. Time moved too fast and too slow all at once. When she approached Daniel with a fresh glass of water, he looked up with something almost like gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured, soft enough that she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. His hand reached not for her but for the napkin she'd set beside the glass. The moment felt ordinary, forgettable. A tiny pause in the chaos, but then the glass tipped. Just a slip of his fingers, a clumsy moment. Water spilled across the table, splashing onto her apron and the floor. He startled, reached forward instinctively, and his fingertips brushed her wrist. Light, accidental, barely there. She didn't think. She reacted. The slap rang out like a gunshot, sharp and impossible to take back. The sound cut through every conversation, every clatter, every breath. Daniel's head jerked to the side, his hair falling across his cheek as he absorbed the impact with a stunned stillness. Silence rolled through the diner in a wave. Tasha froze, her hand hovering in the air, still tingling with the mistake she hadn't meant to make. Her heart thudded, loud enough she could hear it in her ears. Someone gasped, someone whispered. Somewhere a fork hit a plate. Daniel blinked once, twice, then slowly straightened. He didn't reach for his cheek. He didn't stand or shout. He just looked at her, calm, almost apologetic, as if he were the one who'd done something unforgivable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It was my fault." His voice was steady, too steady, and that only made everything worse. Before Tasha could form words, phones went up around the room. A couple near the window had already begun recording. The glow of their screens reflected in the stainless steel counter, cold and merciless. Tasha felt her stomach drop. Carla stormed over, heels tapping too fast against the tile. "What happened?" she demanded. Her eyes darted from the spilled water to Daniel's face to Tasha's trembling hand. "Tasha, what did you do?" He... Tasha stepped back, shaking her head. "It was an accident," Daniel interjected gently. "Really, it was me. I startled her. I'm sorry." His calmness unnerved everyone. If he'd yelled, argued, defended himself, maybe the tension would have broken. But instead he stayed composed, almost sorrowful, as if he understood something no one else did. Carla pulled Tasha aside by the elbow. "What were you thinking?" she hissed under her breath. "Do you want to get fired?" "I didn't mean to hit him," Tasha whispered, eyes burning. "It was just reflex." "Reflex or not, people are recording. Do you want this online? Do you want a lawsuit?" The word lawsuit hit her harder than the slap had hit Daniel. Her breath caught in her throat. Losing this job wasn't just a setback, it was disaster. She had rent to cover, her sister's school fees, groceries, everything depended on this paycheck. When she looked back toward table 7, Daniel was rising from his seat, brushing off the front of his worn jacket. He met her eyes with a small nod, a gesture that somehow carried both forgiveness and sadness. "I should go," he said softly. Carla stepped forward. "Sir, please, let us comp your meal." "That's not necessary." His smile was faint, tired. These things happen. But they didn't. Not like this. Not in front of a room full of people who'd already made up their minds about what they'd witnessed. As Daniel walked toward the exit, whispers trailed behind him. "He's gonna sue her." "Poor guy, she just snapped." "Did you see how quiet he was? That's the dangerous kind." Tasha felt each comment like a sting against her skin. She tried to speak, to call out, to fix any piece of what she'd broken, but her voice wouldn't come. Fear squeezed her lungs. He left without looking back. The bell above the door chimed once, then fell silent. Immediately the room erupted with speculation. 2 waitresses huddled near the register, one whispering, "He looked familiar to me, like I've seen him somewhere important." Carla wasn't listening to them. She was staring at Tasha, arms crossed, waiting for an explanation that didn't exist. Tasha swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together as the pressure mounting all morning finally cracked open inside her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I really didn't mean—" "That doesn't matter now," Carla cut in. "What matters is the fallout." Fallout. The word echoed in her head like distant thunder. She imagined losing her job, losing the tiny amount of stability she'd fought so hard to keep. She imagined her sister's face when she told her they might have to move again. A wave of shame washed over her, hot and suffocating. She had done this. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. For the rest of the shift, she moved like a ghost, silent, rigid, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Every time the door opened, she wondered if Daniel would return with someone official, someone carrying papers that would end her career with a signature. But he didn't return, and somehow that made it worse. By closing time, her coworker Lena approached her quietly, glancing around to make sure Carla wasn't watching. "Hey, that guy from earlier?" she said. "Are you sure he was just a customer?" "What do you mean?" Lena leaned closer. "I don't know. Something about him. The way he looked at this place. The calmness. People like that aren't ordinary." Tasha frowned. Her mind replayed the image of Daniel scanning the diner with that strange familiarity. But she shook the thought away. She had bigger problems than mysteries. She untied her apron with shaky fingers and stepped outside into the fading evening light. Her pulse still hadn't settled. Her palms were cold, and her heart carried the weight of every mistake that day had carved into her. Whatever Daniel's story was, whoever he really was, she couldn't let the day end like this. She needed answers, closure, a chance to fix what she'd done, if fixing was even possible. So she took one slow breath, then another, and made a decision that sent a tremor through her entire body. She would find him. She had to. Tasha didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the slap again. Sharp, humiliating, wrong. By morning, guilt sat on her shoulders like a physical weight. She replayed Daniel's calm expression, that quiet apology he offered her instead of anger. It gnawed at her. People didn't react like that unless something deeper was going on, something she hadn't seen. So she followed the only lead she had, a rumor from Lena, who mentioned seeing Daniel near the community shelter a few blocks from the bus station. Tasha almost didn't go inside. Her hand hovered on the door handle, breath fogging in the cold morning air. She expected to face a man ready to accuse her of everything she feared. Instead, when she finally pushed the door open, the sight inside stole her words before she could speak. Daniel stood behind a serving table, ladling soup into bowls for families lined up in worn jackets and thin scarves. His posture was gentle, steady, when he smiled at a little boy who clutched a plastic dinosaur. The child beamed back as if Daniel had just handed him the sun. Tasha lingered near the entrance, stunned by the quiet warmth of the scene. Volunteers bustled around with practiced rhythm, but Daniel moved differently. Slower, more intentional, like he saw each person as someone worth remembering. He didn't notice her at first. She wasn't sure whether that was a relief or a punishment. She stepped closer, the floor creaking under her shoes. He looked up then, and for a brief second his expression softened with recognition, then settled into something unreadable. "Tasha," he said, not unkindly. Her throat tightened. I needed to find you." His eyes lowered to the table as he handed a bowl to an older woman. "Are you all right?" The question disarmed her. She'd come expecting confrontation, maybe resentment. Not this. "No," she admitted, breath shaky. "I'm not." A volunteer took over his spot, and Daniel gestured for her to follow him into a quieter hallway near the storage room. The air smelled faintly of soap and warm bread. Tasha rubbed her palms against her jeans, searching for words that might fix what she'd broken. "I shouldn't have hit you," she blurted. "I lost control, and it wasn't your fault. I'm so sorry." Daniel studied her, not with judgment, but with the calm curiosity of someone who wanted to understand more than he wanted to accuse. "I startled you," he said. "My mistake." "No, it wasn't just that." She swallowed hard. "My life, it's been heavy lately, but that doesn't excuse what I did." Her voice wavered, and she hated how exposed she sounded. She expected him to pull away, to widen the distance between them. Instead, he leaned slightly against the wall, arms crossed, not defensive, just present. "Thank you for saying that," he said softly. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful, like walking on ground that had only just stopped shaking. After a moment, she asked, "Why were you so calm about it? Anyone else would have yelled, or demanded to see the manager, or something." Daniel looked past her toward the shelter doors, where the low murmur of families drifted through the hallway. "I've seen worse things than a moment of fear," he murmured, then added, "And you seemed like someone caring more than you were letting on." His words struck deeper than she expected. She hesitated before asking, "Why are you here? At the shelter, I mean." He smiled faintly. "This place, It meant something to someone I loved. The shift in his tone was small, but unmistakable. A shadow passed behind his eyes. Tasha waited, sensing he had more to say. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath people release only when trying not to break. "My mother," he continued, "not by blood, but by every other measure that matters. She raised me when no one else wanted to. Worked 3 jobs. One of them was at your diner." Tasha blinked. "Someone from the diner raised you." "Years ago," he nodded. "She worked the morning shift. Always smelled like coffee when she came home. She used to tell me stories about customers she met, about the people she wished she could help. She gave a lot, even when she had nothing." "Where is she now?" Tasha asked quietly. His jaw tightened. A soft tremor lived beneath his next words. "She passed away last winter. Illness. Fast. Unexpected." The hallway seemed to shrink around them. Tasha felt her chest collapse inward, not with guilt this time, but with empathy so sharp it startled her. She whispered, "I'm so sorry." Daniel nodded once in gratitude, though sorrow still flickered in his eyes like a dying flame. "I came back to town to visit the places she loved, to pay respects, not to judge anyone, not to cause trouble." "And instead," she murmured, "you got slapped." He laughed under his breath, a quiet, cracked sound, but his smile wasn't bitter. "Life is strange like that." Tasha leaned back against the opposite wall. The cool surface steadied her. "I thought you were mocking me, or testing me. I saw judgment everywhere because that's all I've been used to lately." Daniel's gaze softened. "Then we were both carrying ghosts into that diner." Another silence, gentler this time, settled between them. Tasha studied him in a way she hadn't before. Not as the man whose face she'd struck, not as the stranger who unnerved her, but as someone with wounds of his own, wounds that didn't show until the right light hit them. "You really cared about her," she said. "Still do," he replied. "Everything I become, it's because she saw something in me before anyone else bothered to look." Tasha lowered her eyes. "No one's ever said something like that about me." "Well," Daniel said, his voice steadying, "maybe they just haven't taken the time to see you properly." Her breath caught. For a moment she forgot the slap, the fear, the whispering customers. Standing there, she wasn't the waitress who'd made a terrible mistake. She was simply a woman who'd been noticed, really noticed, for the first time in a long while. A volunteer called Daniel's name from down the hall. He straightened politely, nodding back. "I should return," he said. "I leave town tomorrow. Just tying up loose ends." The words struck her like a small, unexpected blow. He was leaving. This connection, fragile and strange, would vanish before she understood why it mattered. "Daniel," she said before he could walk away, "if there's anything I can do, anything to make up for what happened—" He paused, studying her once more with that thoughtful, searching expression. "Maybe there is," he said. Her heart thudded once, heavy and uncertain. But he didn't explain. He only gave a quiet, almost grateful smile before stepping back toward the dining hall, leaving Tasha in the hush of the hallway, wondering what decision he had just made, and how it would change everything. Tasha sensed something was wrong before she even reached the front door. The diner was never quiet at this hour, yet the morning air felt suspended, waiting. Then she saw them. Sleek black cars lined along the curb, windows tinted, engines humming low like a warning. Men and women in fitted suits stepped out with tablets pressed to their chests, moving with synchronized purpose. Her heart dropped. This wasn't normal. This wasn't anything close to normal. Inside, the staff stood frozen, gathered near the counter as if expecting an invasion. And maybe they were. The bell above the door chimed as Tasha entered, but the sound felt swallowed by the heavy tension wrapping the room. Carla spun toward her, face pale. "Where have you been? You need to—" She stopped abruptly, eyes widening at something behind Tasha. Oh, God. Oh, my God. Tasha turned. Daniel stepped through the doorway. Except it wasn't the Daniel she knew. Not the quiet man in worn jeans. Not the man who served soup with gentle hands or mourned a woman he loved. This Daniel looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Clean-shaven, tailored navy suit, posture straight with an ease that spoke of authority, not arrogance. His presence filled the room in a way that made every head bow slightly without meaning to. The staff exchanged whispers. "That's him." "No way, that's the same guy?" "He looks important." Tasha's breath caught, trapped somewhere between disbelief and dread. She watched Daniel scan the diner, slowly, deliberately, taking in the chipped counters, the flickering overhead light, the familiar imperfections he'd once looked at with quiet nostalgia. But now, he wore the eyes of someone seeing it for the first time. Or maybe the eyes of someone seeing it for what it truly was. A suited woman stepped forward. "Mr. Rowe, everything is prepared whenever you're ready." Rowe. Tasha blinked. The name tugged at a distant memory. Articles she'd glimpsed, logos she'd seen on hotels far fancier than anything in her world. Daniel Rowe. Hospitality empire. $1 billion brand. A name spoken with the kind of reverence reserved for people who could buy a city block before breakfast. Daniel turned to the room. "Thank you all for being here so early," he said, voice steady, carrying effortlessly across the diner. "I apologize for the abrupt arrival. I wanted to handle this personally." Carla took a step forward, clutching the edge of the counter. "Mr. Rowe, as in Rowe International?" Daniel nodded with quiet confirmation, almost embarrassed by the weight of his own lineage. "My mother began her career here. This diner was one of the first properties our family acquired, long before I understood its significance." The staff exchanged stunned looks. Someone dropped a pen. No one moved to pick it up. "And as of last month," Daniel continued, "I became its primary owner." Tasha felt her knees lock. Owner, not investor, not consultant. Owner. The room tilted around her. He wasn't a customer. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't the gentle stranger she thought she'd hurt. He was a billionaire, one who could fire her, shut down the diner, or erase her future with a single sentence. A soft murmur rippled through the staff. "He's the owner. That video's been everywhere. He saw it. What's going to happen to her?" Tasha swallowed hard, throat dry. The viral video, she hadn't even dared to look at it yet. Her face, her anger, her mistake, replayed online for strangers to dissect. And he had seen it. He had to have. Daniel lifted a hand, and the chatter fell instantly silent. "There were incidents here yesterday," he said carefully. "Events I witnessed firsthand. But before any decisions are made, I want to speak privately with someone directly involved." He turned his gaze toward Tasha. Her breath stopped. "May we talk?" he asked gently. Every pair of eyes in the room pinned her in place. Carla whispered, "Tasha, go. Now." Not out of support, out of fear that refusing him might make things worse. Tasha followed Daniel into the small office at the back of the diner. The air felt cooler there, dimmer. Her heartbeat echoed off the walls. When he closed the door behind them, she instinctively stepped back. "If you're going to fire me," she said quietly, "just say it." Daniel looked genuinely pained. "Is that what you think I came here to do?" "I hit you." Her voice cracked. "People recorded it. My manager thinks I've ruined the diner's reputation. You own this place now. Why wouldn't you fire me?" He watched her, not coldly, not with superiority, but with the heavy contemplation of someone trying to fit broken pieces together. "Tasha," he said softly, "what you did was wrong, and you know that." He let the truth settle, stark, but not cruel. "But I'm not here because of the slap." She frowned, confused. "Then why?" "I'm here," he interrupted gently, because of everything behind it. The words hung between them like a curtain slowly being pulled back. Daniel walked around the edge of the desk, resting his hands lightly on the chair. His voice lowered, carrying the quiet gravity of someone who'd wrestled with this decision all night. "When I came in yesterday," he said, "I wasn't inspecting the food. I was watching the staff, watching how people were treated. My mother believed this place had heart, but I needed to see whether that heart was still here." Tasha lowered her head. "And I showed you the worst part of it." "No," he replied. "You showed me the truth behind it." She looked up, startled. "You're exhausted," he continued. "Overworked, undersupported. You're carrying responsibilities no one else sees. And when people pushed you, you broke. Not because you're cruel, because you're human." Tasha's throat tightened. It felt like he had peeled back layers she didn't even realize she still had. "But that doesn't excuse what happened," she whispered. "It doesn't," he agreed. "Just like my silence didn't excuse your fear. We both reacted from wounds no one else could see." He moved closer, not threatening, just steady. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to understand what kind of workplace my mother devoted years of her life to, and what kind of people are fighting to survive inside it." Emotion swelled in her chest. Confusion, gratitude, shame, hope. She didn't know which one to cling to. "So, what happens now?" she asked, barely above a breath. Daniel exhaled slowly, studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not anger, not pity, something deeper. "That depends," he said, "on whether you're willing to confront more than the mistake you made, whether you're willing to face the exhaustion that led to it, and help me change what needs to be changed." Her pulse stumbled. "Help you? Change what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the office blinds, opening them just enough for the light to spill in. Through the narrow gap, she could see the staff gathered in a worried cluster. People who didn't know what would happen next. "Let's talk about that," he said quietly. "If you're willing." Tasha stood in the doorway of a future she couldn't yet define. One shaped not by punishment but by possibility she never expected. And though she didn't fully understand what Daniel wanted from her, she could feel it already. Everything in her life was about to shift. Tasha expected the ground to shift beneath her, but not like this. Not with possibility instead of punishment. When Daniel first told her what he wanted, she almost laughed, thinking she'd misheard him. Her? Help redesign policies? Her voice cracked when she said, "Why me?" Because she already believed she knew the answer. She wasn't qualified, wasn't stable, wasn't anything except the waitress who'd cracked under pressure and hit her boss without knowing he was her boss. But Daniel met her fear with a steadiness she didn't know how to receive. "Because you've lived what my staff goes through," he said. "Because you understand corners people get pushed into. And because most places are improved by the people who've struggled inside them, not the people sitting above." The words stung and soothed at the same time. She hugged her arms around herself, unsure whether to step forward or run. Every instinct in her warned her she didn't deserve this chance. Every part of her that had ever hoped whispered, maybe she did. She followed him into the diner's small conference room, a space she'd never been invited into before. The blinds were half open, letting in thin bands of sunlight that cut across the table. Daniel set down his tablet and looked at her with an encouraging nod. "Sit. Just talk to me. Tell me what needs to change." Her breath wavered as she lowered herself into the chair. "Where do I even start?" "Start with what almost broke you," he said. The room fell still. Her pulse thumped in her ears as she realized he wasn't asking for a report. He was asking for her truth, and she hadn't spoken her truth in years. So she told him about the buses that never ran on time, the double shifts she took to cover her sister's textbooks, the panic of being one complaint away from unemployment, the customers who confused exhaustion for attitude. She spoke slowly at first, then faster, as though a dam had cracked inside her. Daniel listened, really listened, with his hands folded, leaning forward, eyes focused not on her mistakes but on her pain. At one point he murmured, "No worker should carry all that alone," almost to himself. She kept talking, about the night she went home and cried in the shower so her sister wouldn't hear, about how humiliated she felt after the slap, about how deeply she feared being seen only as the girl who messed up. When she finally stopped, the silence felt thick enough to touch. Daniel let a few seconds pass before he spoke. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being honest. That's harder than anything I could have asked for." She looked down at her shaking hands. "Why does this matter so much to you?" A flicker crossed his face, something tender, something bruised. He shifted slightly as if choosing each word carefully. "Because I grew up with someone who worked herself raw. My mother would come home exhausted from this diner, barely able to stand sometimes, and no one ever asked her what she needed." Tasha swallowed. "You loved her a lot." "She saved me," he said simply. "But I didn't save her back. I left town for school, built my life, got busy, and I forgot how alone she must have felt." His jaw tightened. "When she got sick, she didn't tell me. She didn't want to be a burden, and by the time I returned, it was too late." The ache in his voice was soft but undeniable. Tasha felt it settle into her chest like a shared sorrow. "She worked here," he continued. "This place was her second home. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to honor her. And then—" He hesitated, a hint of rueful humor in his eyes. "Then you slapped me." She winced. "I'm really never living that down, am I?" "Probably not," he said, and despite everything they both laughed. Quietly, but genuinely. The tension that had once defined them began to unravel, thread by thread. Over the next few days they worked side by side, rearranging schedules, brainstorming support systems, discussing fare, pay structures, and mental health breaks. Tasha spoke from experience. Daniel translated her lived reality into policy language. Together, they found a rhythm neither of them expected. Sometimes he shared stories about growing up poor, sleeping in the back of his mother's beat-up car. Sometimes she shared stories about raising her sister, learning to stretch a paycheck until it tore. In those moments, their worlds, so different on the surface, fell open in ways they hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as they reviewed drafts near the kitchen, Daniel watched her make notes with a small frown of concentration. "You know," he said, "you're good at this." She blinked. "At what? Complaining?" "At being honest," he corrected, "at seeing the invisible corners of people's lives, at building solutions that actually matter." Her cheeks warmed. "I'm just trying not to make a fool of myself." "You haven't once," he said softly. "Not here." Something shifted in her then. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. A slow, unfamiliar lightness lifted her shoulders. She began walking through the diner not with fear, but with purpose. Co-workers noticed. Carla noticed. Even the regulars noticed. She stood taller. She smiled more, not the brittle mask she'd worn before, but real, effortless smiles that reminded her she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was contributing. She was changing something. And Daniel saw it. Every time she entered a room, his expression softened just slightly, as if grateful she was there. She didn't know what to do with that feeling, but she didn't push it away either. One evening, after a long session adjusting break rules and benefits, Daniel closed his laptop and leaned back. "I think she'd be proud," he said suddenly. Tasha looked up. "Your mom?" He nodded. "She always said the hardest working people deserve the most protection. I didn't understand that back then. I do now." The sincerity in his voice pressed against her heart. She reached out instinctively, briefly touching his hand. "You're honoring her more than you know." His fingers curled slightly as if they wanted to hold hers, but he stopped himself, offering only a grateful smile. Their bond wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something quieter, built from bruises and truth and long overdue understanding, a foundation strong enough to carry whatever came next. Because something was coming. She could feel it. By the end of the week, the policy revisions were ready, training programs established, emergency support funds approved. Daniel scheduled a public announcement for the next morning, a community event where staff and locals would learn the changes that would reshape the diner's future. As Tasha watched him prepare notes by the window, sunlight catching the softened edges of his expression, she realized she'd begun to hope again. Not just for herself, but for the place that had shaped her, and for the man who was determined to repair it. But hope, she knew, was delicate. And tomorrow's announcement held power, a spotlight that could redefine both of their lives. She inhaled slowly, feeling the air settle deep in her chest, steady and uncertain at the same time. Whatever happened next, it would not be small. The morning of the announcement felt electric, as if the whole diner had taken a breath and held it. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, their cameras reflecting flashes of cold sunlight. Community members pressed against the windows, craning to see inside. And in the middle of it all, Tasha stood near the counter, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She had never been the center of anything, never wanted to be, but today there was no hiding. Today, her choices, her growth, her courage stood on full display. Daniel stepped onto the small platform the staff had set up near the register, dressed not in the sharp suit from his reveal, but in something softer, rolled sleeves, relaxed posture. He looked less like a billionaire, more like a man trying to bridge two worlds. When he tapped the microphone, the room erupted in clicks, whispers, shuffling feet. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice held that steady warmth she'd grown to recognize, the kind that made people lean in without realizing it. "This diner has been a part of my family's story for decades, but over time, we lost sight of that story, and of the people who carry it forward every day." He glanced toward the staff. Some nodded. Some blinked back tears. "During my visit last week," he continued, "I saw moments that troubled me, but I also witnessed bravery, honesty, and the willingness to grow, qualities that define the very best of us." Tasha felt every reporter's head turn in her direction, even before Daniel said her name. "I want to acknowledge someone who made a mistake, owned it, and used it as a catalyst for change. Someone whose voice helped reshape our policies. Someone who reminded me of my mother's resilience." Her breath hitched. The room blurred for a second. She didn't move. "Tasha," he said, "thank you for not giving up. On this place, on yourself, or on the truth that sometimes the people who struggle the hardest see the clearest." Applause rose slowly, then grew stronger. It wasn't polite, it wasn't pity. It was real, full of gratitude and recognition she'd never expected to feel in a lifetime. Even Carla wiped at her eyes behind the counter, trying to pretend she wasn't crying. Tasha stood frozen, overwhelmed by a mix of pride and disbelief. A week ago, she'd been terrified of losing everything. Now she was being thanked in front of a crowd she used to fear disappointing. She lifted her chin, breathing deeply, feeling her feet finally grounded after so long drifting on anxiety. Daniel opened the floor to questions about the new policies, the support programs, the training initiatives. Reporters scribbled furiously and staff members shared thoughts with quiet excitement. But every so often, Daniel's eyes flicked toward Tasha, checking in, grounding himself, letting her know he still saw her. When the cameras shut off and the crowd dispersed, the diner breathed again, softer this time. The room emptied until only staff remained, hugging, laughing, shaking their heads at how much their world had shifted in a single morning. Tasha slipped out the back door into the cool afternoon shade, needing a moment alone. Before she could inhale the calm air fully, Daniel followed her, leaning against the brick wall with an easy sigh. "You did well," he said. She shook her head with a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I didn't even say anything." "You didn't need to," he replied. "You've already done the work." Tasha looked at him then. The man behind the wealth, behind the name, behind the carefully crafted exterior the world saw. And for the first time, she truly understood the weight he carried. Not the family empire, not the public expectations, but the private grief, the longing to make his mother proud, the need to heal by giving meaning to something ordinary, something she once touched every day without realizing its significance. "Your mom would have liked you," she said quietly, surprising even herself. Daniel's smile wavered at the edges. "She would have loved you," he admitted. His voice thickened with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Your fire, your honesty. She would have seen herself in you." The words struck deeper than she expected, settling somewhere inside her like a light warming the cold spaces she didn't talk about. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just let the soft breeze move around them, carrying away the tension that once stood between them. "You know," Daniel added, "when this is all settled, I'll have to leave town for a while. There are meetings, expectations, a lot of loose ends." She forced a small nod. "I figured." "But I'll be back," he said. "This place isn't done, and neither am I." Her heart tugged, but not with fear this time, with acceptance, with trust. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed, a message from her sister. "You coming home soon? I want to hear everything." Tasha felt herself smile, really smile, as she pocketed the phone. "I should go," she told him. "She's waiting." Daniel stepped aside, giving her space. "Of course." But when she walked away, he didn't leave. He stayed leaning against the brick wall, watching her silhouette move toward the bus stop with quiet gratitude, as though the very sight of her reminded him why he'd come back in the first place. Later, as Tasha and her sister walked home, the streetlights flickering overhead, her sister nudged her playfully. "You look different," she said. "Like you're lighter." "Maybe I am," Tasha replied, her voice soft with realization. "I think something changed today." Her sister slipped her hand into hers, swinging their arms the way she used to when they were younger. "I like this version of you." Tasha laughed, a sound that felt new, unburdened. "Me too." Behind them, several blocks away, Daniel lingered near the diner's entrance. The windows glowed warmly, the way they must have when his mother worked inside. He watched the two figures walk off into the fading daylight, then closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment settle into him. What began with shame and grief had become something else, an opening, a shift, a promise neither of them needed to speak aloud. They were no longer defined by what hurt them, they were defined by what they chose to do with it. And as their paths stretched forward, separate for now, but shaped by the same turning point, a quiet truth held steady beneath it all. Some beginnings only reveal themselves at the end of a storm.